right. Well, the great thing was back in 1980, a lot of folks knew of your interest there in military servicemen and women, and your interest in making sure they got a fair shake. And clearly, the 14-person committee that was selected to appoint or to help decide who would be the next judge and subsequently the chief judge of the Court of Military Appeals, the selection committee voted unanimously, 14-0, because they recognized your interest in the affairs or the rights of service members. It was fascinating reading about that. Just a little quote from something in March of '99. You, had served as an Air Force JAG, and he deals very successfully with the Judge Advocates General, even though he often takes positions contrary to theirs. Indeed, he enjoyed the enthusiastic endorsement of all of the service JAGs who were eager to see a nominee with a broad knowledge of military justice. And it showed well in joining the bench and having that tremendous support from the selection committee, what Jonathan Lurie, later the court historian and someone who was a member of that committee, wrote in as a love-in for the 14-person selection committee, which was very special. So clearly your love and following them and supporting them throughout is evident even to this day. This award that you received back in 1999 is now named after you from the Judge Advocates Association on an annual basis.
And I have the privilege of awarding it to others.
Which is great to be there, which is great to be there every year. And it's special to think about that because clearly that helped prompt your forming the Center on Law, Ethics, and National Security back in 1993 there at Duke Law School. Share with you a little about the center. Of course, its tremendous executive director, Colonel Scott Silliman, and what prompted you to create the center there at Duke Law School?
Well, while I was serving as chief judge, I continued to do some teaching at Duke and taught a seminar on national security law, some of the issues that were being encountered during the 80s and were anticipated for the 90s. And at some point, it occurred to me that it would be appropriate to create a center at Duke Law School to focus on issues of national security. Now, there was one prior center which had been organized at the University of Virginia, and ironically, the person who organized it was a former student of mine.
Another Duke Law grad, yeah.
That's right. And he had done a very good job with it. And so I thought there's plenty of room in this field, and we ought to get rolling, and we did. With the help of funding from my mother's estate,
right,
we established the center at Duke. The acronym is LENS, Law, Ethics, and National Security. We brought in Scott Silliman, who had been a very highly regarded colonel in Air Force JAG.
Right.
We didn't know at that time that 9/11 would take place, that terrorism and things of that type would become a major concern. We didn't know there would be problems in Iraq. We didn't know about problems that would take place in the future concerning surveillance. All sorts of very interesting issues. Mm-hmm. And we've been able to have conferences, provide courses, cooperate with other groups, and I think have had sort of a model in terms of work that's important. I have in mind another center or similar activity in a somewhat different area I'm working on now. I don't know what will come of it. But that's in the area of the correctional system and prison and alternatives.
Right.
The United States has a tremendous, a remarkably high percentage of its population who have either are in jail or have been in jail. Mm-hmm. And this problem of confinement and then rehabilitation and reentry is something that's interested me for a long, long time.
The reentry project, one in particular that you've been working on with, who are a couple of the other folks that are helping?
Well, there are several people I've been working on with, and I'll mention in a moment. Let me just give you sort of a history. Sure. Back in 1952, when I was on active duty as an Air Force JAG, the Air Force decided, not so much for humanitarian reasons, but for economic reasons, they would be important to salvage airmen who got in trouble, were tried by court-martial. They get jail sentences, and they were going to be thrown out with a dishonorable discharge. But the Air Force thought, let's try to retrain these people, reorient them, give them a new sense of purpose.
Right.
We've got a big investment. Some of these people have been trained in a very expensive manner, and they need to be salvaged.
Sure.
So they created a center, a group, at the base where I was stationed, and I watched it expand, and it turned into a very successful activity. And so over the years, I've thought about what are the ways in which people can be salvaged. In what way can we make it easier when a prisoner gets out of jail to get a job and to resume activities in the community and be a really productive member of society? Well, about 4 or 5 years ago, one of my former students was in touch with me. He'd been a very prominent lawyer in Western North Carolina, but unfortunately he also had become a white-collar criminal. He had taken some money from client accounts.
Right.
Wound up in federal prison out at Butner for 5 years, several years, 4 or 5 years. And I had contact with him and brought him in to talk to my students after he was released, to talk to them about what happens in prison when seen from the standpoint of a person who's had a long legal background and training and experience. And he, in turn, introduced me to some of the prison officials, including case managers and the warden out there. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if we created a project at Duke, at the law school, to look into this whole field of sentencing. And last fall, that is the fall of 2007, I initiated a seminar on sentencing and punishment. And we looked into topics like probation, alternatives to confinement, problems that arise in reentry. I've been involved in efforts to create a nonprofit foundation that will work in this field. I've been involved, at least in the periphery, in some programs for training judges and prison officials on reentry and getting people out of prison back into the community. And this is really turning into a very gripping activity for me, something I'm really finding worthwhile. I discovered that the wife of one of my former students, who was up in Virginia, has created a very worthwhile project called Boaz and Ruth to take prisoners from the Virginia prisons and reestablish them. In so doing, they have rehabilitated a dilapidated, decaying area of Richmond. So things of this sort are going on, and I want to devote more attention to it and get my students and others interested.
Students there at Duke Law School. That's right.
As well as students at some of the neighboring institutions.
Sure, at North Carolina Central and at UNC Chapel Hill. That's right. That's right.
So I think there's a role to be played in that regard.
There's so many great topics, Dad, and all of them essentially come back. Everything you're sharing comes back to you and really your heart of gold and your ability to reach out on behalf of others, folks that are down or folks that may or may not have been getting proper treatment. We think about service members prior to 1968, maybe not always getting a fair shake, and wanting to make sure that you really worked hard for many years, back from Sam Ervin all the way to that time, and then later representing their interests as a fair and impartial interpreter there.
Well, another area I've tried to help in is veterans and giving them rights, because we got a lot of veterans now. They got a lot of problems. So the ways in which those can be worked on.
Absolutely. It was a great quote here from that same piece back in 1999, highlighting about both all of your students as well as the servicemen and women. I've got to read that, or as devoted to him as he is to them. One of his former clerks stated that he always knows his students, at least by their face. Almost every place he goes, he sees a former student. He has an encyclopedic memory. But another great one, on visits to our military sites, he has a habit of writing a note to everyone he sees, from the commanding generals to the lowest ranking, to come visit him, his court, to visit the Court of Military Appeals. One day an E4 arrived unannounced. Judge Everett was delighted and remembered she'd been one of his drivers. He made her queen for the day, gave her a personal tour, and took her to lunch. You think about those days on the court and the ability to help out both in the courtroom and guiding attorneys of both sides to benefit their clients, but also serving as impartial as possible. No surprise, one court clerk said, he is very busy, but he loves people. He knows no station in life. He's always very inquisitive. Whoever you are, you have something he wants to know about. And that's part of the reason we've had you here yesterday morning and this morning, and we've run out of time. Again, just like last summer, we sure hope we can get you back another time. And thanks again for coming in to be with us today.
Thanks for the privilege of being with you, Greg.
Absolutely. It's been a real treat. Stay tuned to more Carolina People. The Honorable Robinson Oscar Everett coming up next. You know, a great Palmetto State native and a former circuit court judge in South Carolina, and one of Dad's successors there on the Court of Military Appeals, Judge Walter Cox, said it better than anyone. I was once going to write a bio about him, but I found it too daunting a task. We've done over the last 2.5 hours, an hour and a half last summer and an hour today. We've made a stab at it. Still haven't got there. If you want to learn more about him, and I think if you've sat here the last 2 days, you'll want to, get online to carolinapeople.com. Check out some of the interviews from last summer. Hear about Dad and another student there at Harvard in an eating competition with the Yale football coach. Hear about his adventure, actually his night in jail, on carolinapeople.com from last summer. It's a great treat, and I hope you enjoyed the last 2 days as much as we have. Dad, thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Being with us
Great
this morning.
to be with you.
Absolutely, yes.